Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the person behind the recently released book, Marvel Super Graphic, A Visual Guide to the Marvel Comics Universe. It's Tim Leong. Thanks for coming on, Tim.
Hey, thanks, David.
So we are recording this on Thursday, October 16th. It is the first official day at New York Comic Con, an event that neither of us are at. How is it not being at the Javits Center right now?
First off, I love New York Comic Con.
I do too.
I'm very happy to also just be here. You know, I won a contest for the very first New York Comic Con to be the kind of like video host of the show. And so we went around for New York Comic Con, I was like their video host and went around and we interviewed all these people and they cut all these videos from just like a dozen different videos from the show floor.
How exactly does one win a contest to become a video host for New York Comic Con?
You had to submit a video.
Makes sense.
As if you were like auditioning for, I don't know. So you had to send in some sort of like audition video. And then I was chosen.
I imagine it's kind of a similar process to become an MTV VJ, except for much different because it's a New York Comic Con video host. When was this? I don't even know when the first New York Comic Con was.
I don't know. I want to say like 06, something like that.
Okay. That's interesting. That is it's funny. One of the things I wanted to bring up to start with is while I know and love Super Graphic and know and love Comic Foundry because you gave me a copy last time I saw you, I think for some listeners, you're going to be a bit of a mystery. And I think that the video hosts for the first New York Comic Con thing only adds another layer of mystery to it. Who is this person who does everything? So let me count it down real quick. You were a video host at the first New York Comic Con. You were the person who ran Eisner-nominated comics magazine, Comic Foundry.
Yeah, Eisner losing.
See, okay, just really quick. I know this is a complete aside already. Thank you. I kept calling myself an Eisner loser, and people said, you just didn't win. I'm like, that sounds like being a loser to me. I don't understand. So anyways, so you did that. You're the author and designer behind the new book, Marvel Super Graphic, as well as the two previous volumes in Super Graphic and Star Wars Super Graphic. You also have a day job, and you've previously worked in design and leadership roles at varying magazines. That's a lot. How do you view yourself? Are you an author? Are you a designer? Are you a jack of all trades? Are you an aspiring MTV VJ? What's your deal, man?
I definitely consider myself a designer first, but having done 3 books, I guess I'm an author, and I'm just still trying to come to terms with like that's a reality, and I need to believe in myself better that I am an author and just own it. But yeah, I also just think of myself as a supporter of comic books. I love the industry, and no matter what I'm doing, I'm just trying to push it and promote it and support it however I can.
I think one of the difficult things with talking about who anyone is today is it's really hard to pin anyone down as one thing because we always have other things, right? It's like sketch and off panel aren't even my job. Like my day job is in advertising. No one talks to me about that. And I have all these other things. And like trying to define yourself as one thing seems really difficult. But yeah, you're definitely a designer and an author. And I imagine it's hard to think about that just because like the first Super Graphic came out in 2013. So that's 3 books in 13 years or 11 years. And so it's like design is your everyday. And, you know, doing Super Graphic is an occasional thing, I guess. It's a lot of commitment for an occasional thing.
It's a lot. It's very all-encompassing, which is why the cadence has been so slow. They just take so much work to do because if you're not familiar with the book, the short version is it's a book of infographics and charts and data visualizations all about a one topic. And this one, it's all Marvel Comics. The first one was just comics in general. The second one was Star Wars, and this one is all Marvel Comics. And so there's a lot that goes into it from its like research and then design and then writing. And sometimes like you have a great idea and then you don't have the data to support it. And sometimes you have a great idea and then you do the research and the design looks like shit. And you're like, well, that doesn't work. So let me start over, you know? So there's just a lot that goes into it. And so that's kind of why they're so spread out.
And sometimes you do 2 different charts about the heights of varying superhero characters and do not include Stiltman in either of them somehow.
That is true. That is true. I saw you say that. I was like, oh, yeah, I probably should have.
The one character literally defined by his height. Well, before we get into Super Graphic into more detail than Stiltman, I did want to ask about your comic origin story because from what I understand, your origin story kind of starts like mine to some degree with like things outside of comics where if I understand correctly, part of Super Graphics Origins is like your love of the Marvel Universe trading cards. Is that
Yes.
part of your superhero or your comic book origin story?
Yeah, I mean, I was always my first love was Marvel Comics. I love DC too, but like Marvel was just how I kind of got into it, like through Spider-Man and then X-Men and then yeah, the Marvel Universe trading cards. I know, and I think we've talked about them a little bit,
Hmm.
but right, I was like so into them. I have like the full sets of versions 1, 2, 3, and 4, and on the back of them, right, they have these little chart power ratings. Captain America is like a 4 speed and like a 6 power, whatever it is. And that was really my first introduction to even just like charts and data, and comic book data. And I think what we talked about, right, at some point was like characters they pick for these cards are just there's the staples, but then there's also like random ones. And you're like, who is this guy? I've never heard of this person. Like, I need to like check them out. I think also like some storylines too. They mentioned I was like, I've never read this, and this was back in like the 90s. You couldn't just like go find that issue, like you can now. It definitely opened up the Marvel universe to me as like things I need to like check out and made me want to explore more.
I've talked to somebody about this, and I did this piece about the origins of those cards a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I think it was Matt Wilson that said that they're basically comic book Wikipedia for kids of a certain generation, where it's like, okay, I don't know precisely what is going on with this character, but it tells me when this character first appeared, and it tells me a little bit about their background and their powers and things like that. And it's such an amazing gateway for people like people of a certain age who just were trying to find a way in. For a lot of people, Marvel Universe cards was that way in.
Yeah, yeah, and those cards are really important to me, and really affected me throughout my career. As you kind of alluded to, I worked at Entertainment Weekly for 8 years, and I was the creative director there, and then also ended up assigning all the kind of working on all the Marvel and Star Wars stuff, and those covers. But when Infinity War came out, we were just like, this is kind of a problem because there's like it's so cool because like all these characters are in here. Like, how do we do a cover for like 25 different characters? Right? It's like this is like a logistical problem. And what I really thought back to were when you had trading cards back then, they came in like these. You get these books, these binders to store them in. It'd be like a 3x3, right? So it's like row one, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And in some of those cards, they would kind of connect and make this like tapestry, like one giant picture. And I was like, that's how we could do some of these covers. We could do magazine covers like that. And we ended up doing like a 5x5 grid of magazines for Infinity War. And it was all based on those Marvel Universe cards and how they kind of like all connect and make one big tapestry.
I had no idea you did that, and I now have to look for that because that is absolutely amazing. I think it was Marvel Universe Series 4 that first did it. Also, I want to show you something that is literally on my desk. I have a frame, a tiny little frame that I don't even remember where I got it from. I think my wife was just like, oh, I found this frame. Do you need it for anything? It is the perfect size for a Fin Fang Foom Marvel Universe Series 1 Arthur Adams drawn card. It is amazing. Actually, I think it's Series 2, but still. It was a great gateway, but that's the thing though, is like a lot of people are into comics when they're younger. The thing that I think is amazing about you is that not that you're the only person who continues to love comics, but you've really embraced it in a lot of different ways, despite the fact you've never actually been a creator, so to speak, or somebody who writes or draws comics. What do you think it is about comics that have made you such a lifelong fan that's embraced in so many unique ways?
I wasn't like I fell off after around college or so. Or even high school, like I kind of fell off. Like I think once I kind of graduated to high school and college, I didn't go to the store. It wasn't really my thing. I kind of just fell out of it. But I got back in because my cousin went to the Kubert school. So he was like always a big comic guy. And I think we had gotten talking about something. And then I was like, I should just go because I worked just around the corner from Midtown Comics in New York, the Grand Central location. And it felt very like a kind of a TV moment or something. Like I was just kind of just browsing around. I hadn't been to the store in, years. And I remember it was like the Strokes were playing on the radio. And like I saw it was Ex Machina issue 2. It was like this Abraham Lincoln cover. And I was just like, I've never seen anything like that. What is this? And I had to check it out. And like that was like my gateway drug, like back in. Like that is like the single image that hooked me back into comics. And I picked it up with like sudden. I was just like, I don't know what this is, but I have to get it. And like after that, I was like hooked and like back in. Yeah. Then after that, I was like just back.
Yeah, it's a very common story. Like people take a lot of. I took my break between late high school and early college, and my gateway back in was actually Why the Last Man, because the last comic I had read was Preacher, and it was Preacher, which remains to this day probably like my co-favorite comic I've ever read. And I went into my shop. My mom basically told me, she's like, you. She wanted me to start reading comics again because she thought I gave up something I loved because of how it would be perceived of me socially to continue to read comics. And she's like, I know you love this. I will buy you something. Let's just go to the comic shop when you're back from college. I was like, okay.
Mom, that's great.
The clerk was heard what I was previously read, and he's like, you should check out this Why the Last Man thing. And Brian K. Vaughan, apparently, for both of us, the gateway back in.
Yeah. I love that. That image was so great. I bought the original art for that cover.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
That is awesome. That is an amazing piece of art to have, because then it's like you have that personal connection to it too.
It means something. Yeah. Yeah.
So besides like Ex Machina, were there any comics or anything that you think that really kind of sealed the deal for you, and either as a gateway when you were younger, or a gateway, when you're getting back into it?
I mean, I feel like Ex Machina was the thing. And then I went back after I read that. I was like, oh, what else has he done? And yes, so Why the Last Man was big for sure. And then I started right after that is when I launched Comic Foundry as a website.
Oh wow! So you went right in.
Yeah, I have like zero patience. I have zero patience.
The distance between inspiration and action is very short for you.
Well, I was like, let's just do this. Let's just, because like I feel like you got to strike when iron's hot. Like let's just go for it, and built a website out of it. And originally, it wasn't like a magazine website. Originally, it was a website to help place aspiring comic book artists with aspiring comic book writers.
Interesting.
And it was this was like in the Friendster era of like social media, and we had someone build this whole complicated website where you can like connect with people, and there were forums, and basically it was supposed to be like a forum and tool for helping educate and to connect comic artists and writers. And just as a way to draw people in, we would do content, like education-based content about comics, and really is talking about like how, like, get into the nitty-gritty of like the creation of things. And that was the thing that really took off. And shockingly, as someone that is not an educator and is not trained in any of that stuff, that part did not really, the other part of the website didn't really work out, but all of the content, interviews and articles, that's what took off. And then that's what we ended up focusing on later.
I was looking through, I think it was like a blog spot that had a bunch of the old content on there still. And it was like the first thing was like 2006. And then the magazine started in 2007. So you had Comic Foundry, which started as that site, and then it became this actual magazine in 2007. I mean, what made that something you wanted? Was it just because you had that inspiration? You're like, I need to act on this. Well, most people don't make a magazine after they rediscover comics.
Well, one, I worked in magazines at the time. I worked at Men's Health as a designer and an associate art director at the time. So I loved magazines, right? Like I went to journalism school. I've always been like a print media person. It's just kind of hard to like start with a magazine. But the other thing too was just like the stuff that I wanted to read, like as a magazine, I did not see in the world. It was like the Comics Journal, which is great, and Wizard. And I just didn't feel like that was really a appropriate like representation of like what I wanted to read. And I didn't really see myself in that.
There's definitely two poles. Like there's kind of opposites in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I was trying to build something that was kind of in between. I just like comics. And sometimes, it's like kind of like music. It's like I don't like just like one type of music. I just like good music. Right. So it's like sometimes I'm going to read some indie stuff. Sometimes I'm going to read some manga. Sometimes I'm going to read some DC or whatever. So that was that. And you couldn't do that. Like that. There wasn't content like that. It seems kind of strange now because I feel like the coverage now is like so much more diverse and varied. Back then, it was much more limited.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is kind of tricky though, because a lot of times, I mean, I bet you even see this to some degree with your books, is like the people who are really into one thing can sometimes stick to that one thing. Like some people are, I mean, like the Marvel versus DC paradigm is a real thing for a reason. Like some people are ride or die with that. I don't get that. I don't understand only like being into one type of thing, but I think it's a much more healthy mindset to be kind of open to everything. And that's the thing I looking through Comic Foundry, because for listeners, Tim had given me a copy of Comic Foundry's 5th and final issue because there was a cover article on Brian Lee O'Malley, and I was doing a interview with him for at San Diego Comic-Con. And I read through the whole thing. I mean, I think it's amazing. I really wish something like this still existed, but it's just, obviously it's a completely different world. I am curious though, you said you went to journalism school. Did you go specifically for design?
No, the University of Missouri broken down into like, there's a magazine track, newspaper track, broadcast, etc. I think there is a design track now, but like that did not exist when I was there. But that's what I focused all my stuff on. So like I did like a lot of newspaper design, magazine design in college.
What was the draw to that?
I don't know. I just kind of fell into it. I like wasn't good enough to be like a beat writer, like a newspaper writer. Like it wasn't my thing. Like I did some of it. I was like, this, it just wasn't clicking. And then I did design. I was like, oh, that works. Because I found it.
Well, I mean, it's kind of funny. I've always been a magazine aficionado. I still buy magazines. I told somebody the other day that I bought a $30 magazine and they looked at me like I grew a third head. And I'm like, that's actually not that bad anymore. A profound waste of time. It's a video game magazine that John Allison recommended. Cartoonist John Allison. Amazing stuff. Anyways, but it's interesting because like magazines, it's almost like a different language of publication. It has this like a very specific language to it, visually speaking, that I think is really interesting. And I think that's something you did really well is like with the magazine, I'm not trying to defame Wizard. I love Wizard, but it felt more like a proper magazine. It felt like I was reading like Entertainment Weekly or something, for example.
Thank you. That's so kind. I will say I did try to approach it with like a healthy mindset of like comics are for everyone and like we do all things. I would say the one thing that was not healthy is that like I was extremely petty at that time. And the cover price for Comic Foundry was $5.98, which we advertised as 1 cent cheaper than Wizard.
You're saying that you're being petty? Are you kidding me? The issue that I have literally says "Suck it, Wizard" on the cover, Tim.
That was a very different time. It was a very different time. Very different time.
Believe me, I get it. And 1 week from today, I'm going to go see the bands Taking Back Sunday and The Used in concert. 2 bands that I loved when I was in college. And I listened to them recently. And I told my wife, I was like, I think I was a pretty dramatic 19-year-old. Because, oh boy. Yeah, so we're all way different when we were younger. Still, it's pretty cool.
And I have met like a lot of, since then, a lot of people that worked at Wizard, and they're all great people.
I mean, honestly, like one of my long-standing things I wanted to write is the oral history of Wizard magazine. And there's so many amazing people that ended up working in the comic industry that people don't even really realize. Like Alex Segura worked at Wizard. Alejandro Arbona worked at Wizard. Agent M. God, what is his actual name? I don't remember Agent M.
Ryan Penagos.
Right, Ryan Penagos worked at Wizard. There's a lot of different people who have roots there. But so you did Comic Foundry. You end up publishing 5 print magazines before bowing out. What led to that decision?
Well, I would say I published with Laura Hudson, who was like my partner in crime on that, who is just one of the best writers out there, incredibly talented journalist. She's fantastic. But honestly, I was at Complex magazine at the time, and I got promoted to the design director, so like the department head, and I just couldn't do it. Like I looked at my work, like my last issue. I looked at my work, my complex work of my last issue while we had Comic Foundry, and then the next issue after it was gone. It was just like night and day. Like I wish I could have come up with a better solution to kind of keep it going or give it to someone else or something, but it was just too ingrained. It's like I was writing, editing, designing, selling ads, calling the printer, like doing everything. It was I was just too connected to move it on to someone else. But I do wish, that is one of my regrets, is that I wish we could have figured out a solution for it.
When you say night and day, do you mean that basically like having the time to focus more on what you need to focus on kind of allowed you to?
This may be a shock, but if you spend all of your time building a magazine on the side in your studio apartment on the Upper East Side until like 3 o'clock in the morning, every day. I mean, this was crazy, man. Like when I first had the Comic Foundry website, it would, nowadays, it's so easy to publish stuff. Like the tools are just so different back into like 2005 or something. Back then, it would take me until like 3 o'clock in the morning to update the website. And so what I did was for like a month solid, I just stayed up till 3 o'clock in the morning every single day just to kind of help adjust my body to like be able to function like that. So like when I had to update the website once a week, it wasn't like just total like body killer. Maybe I'm killing my body in the long run, but there was the only way I could figure out how to function in that way. So it was definitely time consuming back then. There was a lot. It was a lot of work.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Warning, warning, warning. You have been reported by Oni Press for possession of Skin Police #1, the visceral and violent vision of 22nd century hyperaction, coming to comic shops this October. In the year 2142, fertility levels will plummet, illegal clones will become a thriving underground black market for desperate families, but unbeknownst to everyone, 3 in 4 of these genetic duplicates will degenerate into psychologically unstable killing machines at some point in the life cycle. Whoops! Fortunately, the United States of Europe has decided to take up the unenviable task of hunting these human time bombs before it's too late. To the government, they're the duplicate identification and capture division. To everyone else, they're the skin police. The worst part of the job? It's always the one you least suspect. From rising stars Jordan Thomas and Daniel Geet comes the page-turning science fiction spectacle 2024. Skin Police #1 in comic shops everywhere this October. And now, back to the show. So you did Comic Foundry. You operate in that space where you were kind of combining your passions and your job into one space until it nearly killed you. I am curious, though, as to how you feel like, doing Comic Foundry, where you were doing all that stuff until 3 a.m. and you were making a side hustle, something that was super fantastic. How do you feel like that, like the reps you put in there, changed your work that you did at Complex, at Wired, and Entertainment Weekly, and, other jobs that came up down the path?
I think it really helped ingrain this idea of like how necessary it is to have a side project. Even it doesn't have to be like a big thing, but I'm just like, that's like my one advice for people is just like do something for you.
Yeah.
Like on the side, like I give my all at work. I give 120% and just like I try to do my best job ever, every single day. But there's still something left over, and I just like to have like the idea of having something that's for myself. And I feel like that working on that magazine on the side was like kind of what really kickstarted that for me. I feel like it changed so much for me, like just even how I thought and just like the idea, like being able to work fast, being able to have this like constant churn of like story ideas. I don't know, like I'm sure it's the same thing for you, right? Because you've done like 17,000 of these podcasts right now. It's like, and I'm sure you're just like constantly thinking of questions, or you see something out in the world, like, oh, and suddenly you've got like 2 pages of notes on your phone, for something you don't even have planned yet. You're just riffing. Like it's a muscle.
Yeah, I mean, putting in the reps helps you kind of. I mean, the hardest part for a lot of this stuff, at least for me, I don't know what it is for you, is like idea creation. Because like the execution for me is actually really easy. Like I sometimes will write articles. I don't say this to brag. This is just like how I work. I always say that I'm like the stenographer of my thoughts. And so like when I sit down to write an article that's sometimes like 5,000 words, I will do it in an hour and 15 minutes.
That's crazy.
And I just churn it out so fast. And it's because I've been thinking about it so much. But a lot of times the problem is like when with like the side hustle stuff and you got your day job stuff going on so hot, sometimes the idea creation suffers because you don't have the time to really put it. It's kind of like when you talk to a comic artist, the thing that they need to focus on the most is the layouts, because that's the storytelling. And it's like if they can't focus on that storytelling, they can't do the rest of it. And I think that's kind of like the equivalent for, I don't know, at least what I'm doing. I can't really necessarily speak for you, but what do you think that side hustle, do you think it just sharpens you and like makes you better at your day job, but also just kind of keeps you happier? Is that kind of why you advise to have that?
I think it just keeps me whole.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it makes me sharper, but it just makes me feel more whole, like having more complete and just like kind of creatively sound.
Yeah. Would you call Super Graphic a side hustle?
Yeah.
It's quite the side hustle.
They don't always have to be that big, right? It could be something like redecorating my office or something,
Yeah, making a giant Tomer Hanukkah thing to put behind you from Entertainment Weekly.
Exactly. That idea creation is really hard because like when I worked at Complex, we would do a ton of photo shoots, and so we'd always have to come up with like all these different photo shoot ideas. And the thing that like I really tried to hold myself to was just committing to a list of 10 was like my trick for me, because I found that like I would start coming up with ideas and I'll just write them down, and I'd get like the second one. I was like, that's fucking gold. That's it. Number 2 is great. And you would just stop. And I was just like, let me just like push to do 10. Because even like, you just don't know. Even if you think you've got it, like, let's just finish the list. And then if the rest are trash and like number 2 is the winner, great. But like, let's just finish the list and just like push to just to round it out, because you just never know like what you're going to come up with.
I also imagine sometimes when you have that second one, you're like, I nailed it. This is all I need. But then you get to your 10th one and you're like, this one's actually slightly better.
Yeah, for sure.
I do have to ask though, you had your varying stops, including the Entertainment Weekly, where you were the deputy editor and the creative director, I believe it was, at the end. How often did you try to sneak in comic things at those varying stops?
All the time. I would, I always try to hire comic book artists to do illustrations, like this Tomer Hanuka behind me. It's like I hired like our Kiko Johnson, like one of his first like editorial jobs. I don't know, so many people like just always trying to hire comic book artists, because one, I just felt they were like an untapped resource in the editorial world, because they're so good. They're just like so good, and no one was really hiring them. So I was like, yeah, let's get them in here. I want to give work to the people that I like,
Yeah. Well, and also it brings a special flavor to it. Like, hiring Tomer Hanuka or Arkiko Johnson to do something for Entertainment Weekly is going to be something that, I grew up reading Entertainment Weekly. I have to admit, it was always my goal to end up on the must list for something. And unfortunately, I never actually did it. But seeing something like that would have been different. And different can sometimes spice things up in a real and interesting way. Good job on Arkiko Johnson, by the way. That is a serious editorial illustration superstar that you helped birth in some ways.
He has helped himself. I have not.
I know
0% credit. He's just such a talent and such a nice guy. He's great.
Okay, let's talk about Super Graphic, and we'll start with the core idea. The first Super Graphic book was called just that, and it was a visual guide to the comic book universe through a whole bunch of amazing infographics that came out back in ye olden days of 2013. And you made it when I think you were working at Wired then?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was gifted to me by my wife back then as well, back in 2013 for Christmas. And it is an amazing book you did through Chronicle Books. Chronicle, who always does amazing stuff. I am curious, how did that project come together and what made you want to data visualize comics in such a way?
I had the idea, and just like a lot of ideas, they just kind of come and go. And then 6 months later, it kind of came back and I was like, oh, huh. This idea is still around. I feel like if they come back around, they're still the ideas that kind of persist are the ones that are really worth pursuing. And at that time, I had never designed an infographic. I worked at Wired as an art director, and I would assign a lot of infographics, but I hadn't made any myself. And Chronicle was just 2 blocks away from the Wired office in San Francisco. And so I was just like, let me just try it. And I made 40 pages of sample pages of like charts and just like ideas. And then just through media, we knew someone that had worked there, and they kind of helped make an introduction and send it through. I sent it to like I think 1 or 2 other places too, and Chronicle said yes. I couldn't believe it, especially since I had never actually designed any infographics before.
I have to say, I'm actually astonished that you'd never done an infographic, because I feel like that was kind of peak of its powers infographic, a period where people love doing infographics.
Yeah. Well, it's just like I hadn't done them before, and there's things I can do and things I can't do. But like I tried to find a style that worked for me, that was still impactful, but I could still get my point across and still be really cool. Hopefully.
I think you did a very good job. I do have to say, this is not me besmirching Marvel Super Graphic or Star Wars Super Graphic. The original one was really my jam. I love how broad it was, because you had infographics about everything in there. You had superhero ones, and you had like The Walking Dead, where Walking Dead was also enormously popular at that time, kind of like superhero level popular, really.
Yeah.
But there's also the Chris Ware sadness scale, and Who is Left in Y the Last Man, a percentage breakdown of the population based on varying things based off of, I presume, like census data or something like that. Both of which I loved. I love just saying the Chris Ware sadness scale out loud makes me laugh. I just think it's amazing.
I completely forgot about that. Yes, I love that. I think Heidi is responsible for the Why the Last Man thing.
Heidi McDonald?
If I remember correctly, yeah. I think she helped put that data in there, because it's in one of the first issues. I think it's in the back of the first floppy.
Oh, okay. I don't have the first floppies. I didn't realize that.
As just like a kind of gives, if I'm remembering this correctly, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it's at the back of the first issue of Y, and it kind of helps give context to like how devastating and how massive the event is.
bizarrely, amongst all of the things that are in there, honestly, one of my favorite things is I'm going to show you this, which is terrible audio podcasting because people cannot see this. But probably my favorite infographic is actually the full disclosure look at your bookshelf, where you broke down the composition of your comic book shelves to showcase how legit you were. That was super fun. I don't know. There is like something about this one where it's like, because, you know, you're just kind of riffing. You're just kind of doing your own thing. Yeah. It seemed like you really got to embrace all the different sides of yourself as a comic fan and showcase it in a really interesting way.
Yeah. It's funny. When I was doing that, you know, my editor, I don't know, I was kind of really gun shy in doing that kind of stuff. And I was like, I don't really want to put myself in here so much. And my editor was just like, no, opposite. You should like put more and just more of yourself in there. I don't know, just like as a way to kind of connect with people. And I guess obviously that worked. Good job, editor.
You know, honestly, I think that is, I'm not trying to say that you have to like show off your street cred or something like that with comic fans, but being able to see a breakdown of like kind of what your own bookshelves look like, you see that and you're like, I understand this person. Like, I honestly think that I talked with somebody about this on the podcast before. I can't remember who it is or who it was, but I think if you look through a person's comic book collection, I think you can kind of understand who they are as an individual based on kind of what they emphasize and what they gravitate towards.
I think that's right.
Yeah, there's like a biographical element to it where I see this and I'm just like, oh, he has this many DC comics, but he specifically separates out Vertigo, which means something. I don't know. It tells a tale about who Tim is.
That should be like a business card.
What is?
They should design business cards. This is an idea. Okay, David. This is
all right. I like it. Yeah.
So we're going to design business cards that have, you could input all of your bookshelf, and then we'll print out a little, and you hand out you trade cards like, oh.
I think I need to hire you for this. I need my next sketch business card to be a visual representation of my bookshelf. I do have to ask though, how different do you think your bookshelves would look if you did it again now for comics?
Probably different. Yeah, it's got to be different. That's like 10 years ago.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's just kind of, that's one of the things that I think is interesting is if you did this book now, it's wild to think about how much the comic industry has even changed in 11 years.
Yeah. I'm trying to think back to what tiny apartment I was living in New York back then. And now it's like, you know, you have like that one Billy bookcase or whatever from IKEA. Yeah. And now it's a whole, you know, there's like several of those and there's like probably 2 or 3 in my garage. Probably it's very different. It's very different.
Saga wasn't even out yet. I do think that's one of the funny things that people forget about. Space is one of the big determinants on how many comics you can really have. Like that was one of the things I did this piece about what readers of single issues actually thought and like how their reading habits were changing. And one of the things that was fueled most of their decisions was like, I am running out of physical space.
Yeah, it's really hard because I won't stop buying them.
Well, what does it say in your bookshelf? Let's see. On your bookshelf infographic, there's a breakdown at the bottom. It says, incomplete series I plan on compulsively completing. That's all of them. Oh, books I haven't read. That was almost a quarter of them. That is the most quintessential comic book fan thing of continue to buy comics despite the fact you have not finished reading them. I love it. It's amazing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a whole, I have a bookshelf here. I haven't read any of them yet. I find this time to read all these books, Dave. I don't understand.
I don't. You think I've read everything in here? I actually have read a lot of these things. But the ones upstairs, that's where the nightmare begins. Okay, I did want to ask about Star Wars Super Graphic really quick. That was the sequel. Given the fact that Marvel was kind of your origin story for comics, I kind of would have thought you would have went to Marvel next, but you did Star Wars. What made you want to do that? Like, what made that the ideal second one?
They asked me to.
Oh, okay. Were you a Star Wars fan too?
Well, my publisher asked. I was a Star Wars fan. I was definitely a Star Wars fan. And my publisher, Chronicle, asked if I would do it, if I was interested. And I was like, totally. Star Wars seems great. The trick was, I only had 4 months to do that book.
What?
And the first one was probably like a year.
Yeah.
So it was like definitely expedited. The nice thing about Star Wars, though, is that there was a smaller range of what was canon at the time. Because it was like 2016, 2015, something like that. And so there wasn't as much to go through. Like there were like probably like 6 books or something like that. All the movies, the TV shows, you know, it would be very different now because there's just been so much more in all the comic series. You know, this was before any of the comic series had come out yet. I think I turned it in the day Rogue One came out. Wow. But I had to like watch it Thursday night at midnight, go home. I just reserved like 3 pages for Rogue One. I was like, I'm going to come up with something. And I had to like watch Rogue One that night, turn in, do some pages and then turn it in the next day.
Yeah. It's a really wild world because the depths are really there for Star Wars in a way that a lot of people don't really know. They're like, oh, I've seen the movies and the TV shows. And you're like, you barely even started. I say that as a person who literally, well, the thing that's blocking me from reading comics right now is I'm reading a Star Wars book. And it is in your canon fodder infographic that you have on here. So,
Oh, which one? Which book are you reading?
Star Wars Kanan by my guy John Jackson Miller from Comic-Con. Yeah, I got that a few years ago, and I hadn't read it, and I needed something to read because I had to go to Pet ER for my foster cat, and we had 5 hours to spend there. And so I was like, oh, I'll read this book, and I was like, I am totally hooked on this book now. Sorry, comics.
That was a great book. I really liked it, and it was I think I did that once for an audiobook.
Oh, really? That's awesome. I've never done audiobooks. That is a complete aside. We don't need to go down there, but
Oh, they're great.
I know people who swear by them. There's this one person who's like, oh, I just read that. And I was like, oh, yeah, what did you think? And he was just like, the voice was great. And I was like, what do you, oh, did an audiobook. Okay. Let's talk about Marvel Super Graphic. It is your recently released book that visualizes, and I quote, dozens of deep dive data points and witty, I wonder subjects ranging from character speed rankings to the length Mr. Fantastic can stretch before it hurts, which is a very good one. I want to point out that is fantastic. Into a glorious book of informative and fun pie charts, bar graphs, Venn diagrams, and a whole lot more. And then I quote again, Marvel Super Graphic shines a fun and fascinating new light on beloved comics, characters, and Marvel history. It's your first one you've done since 2017. I hope to God you had more than 4 months to do this after the first volume in Star Wars Super Graphic. How did this one come together? And what made you want to go down this road once again after doing 2 books?
Again, Chronicle had reached out. They said, like, are you interested in this? And I was like, yeah. The big thing that had changed in between the Star Wars one and this one is that I had 2 kids.
That's a pretty significant change.
I finished the Star Wars one, I think 6 weeks after my son was born. And so, I had a second kid after that. And I just find myself being much more precious with my time. Because like any side project, even though I'm a big proponent of them, any side project, right, like is just going to eat away at some sort of family time. And so there are some things I have not pursued. But when they came back with a Marvel one, I was like, I love Marvel. It was too good of an opportunity to pass up.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, you said you have to be a little bit more precious with your time because you're kids. Do you still feel, though, that you need to find those things for yourself? Like, do you especially feel like that in some ways now that you have kids?
I would say more so because especially I know I find that like as I'm a parent, I'm less of myself because you're just giving more and more to your kids. And that's great. I have no problem with that. But I think it's even more important to like find things for you. You can't like, if I'm not like whole, like there's going to be less of me to give to my kids and to my, right? Like for my family.
I think to some degree, and it's not just kids. To be honest, like my wife and I, we volunteer for local cat rescue and we foster cats and stuff like that. Yeah. And like, I'm not trying to, I've made way too many comparisons between cats and kids to parents in my life. And they're like, oh boy, do not say that to us. But you can lose yourself in anything. And if you don't find time for yourself, like you're right. I mean, I imagine it's like, it makes it harder for you to be your best self with your kids if you don't have those things that you do for yourself.
100%. That's exactly right. And whatever that is for you, great. For me, it's like finding time to do some fun creative projects on the side, big or small, whatever it is. That's important for me. It's like today's Thursday. I'm going to go play tennis tonight. It's like, that's my Thursday routine. I feel like that's like the thing that makes me super happy. And if I'm the happier I am as a person, like the better partner I'm going to be, the better parent I'm going to be. My wife and I talk about that all the time. And she's definitely supportive of me trying to, pursuing, these little creative projects, and definitely supportive of her trying to do those things. But basically, whatever you do to make yourself feel more whole, super important, super important.
So your circumstances have changed a lot over, well, I mean, even between Star Wars and now, the Star Wars Super Graphic and now. How much do you think you've changed as a designer since you did the first Super Graphic?
Oh, what a really interesting question. Huge. The first one I did when I was at Wired, and Wired was like a real eye-opener. I came in because before that I was the design director at Complex, and I was like a big fish in a small pond. And then I went over to Wired, and it really up-leveled what I thought was good. Like what I thought was an A was really a B. And I was just like really working with incredibly talented people to understand the detail and fidelity of like making great editorial design. And then when I went to Entertainment Weekly and I was the creative director there, I just learned so much for the people on my staff. It was just the best experience I'd ever had. I feel like my design got better, so much better in that time. And so kind of be scared to look back at some of the super graphic pages. But I also like very consciously try to evolve the design in each of the books.
Yeah.
So because the topics were somewhat similar, I wanted to make sure visually the books were not as similar, that they felt different, and they all kind of could stand alone and have their own kind of design aesthetics. I mean, as subtle as they are, the Star Wars one, we tried to put in a lot of that Imperial background stuff. And
oh yeah, yeah, there's some really good stuff in there that you did there. And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Zoop is where some of the biggest names in comics are crowdfunding. Live campaigns include Switchblade Shorties, the final work from the late Ed Piskor, new publisher Panic Entertainment's Sampler Pack, master painter Dave Dorman's first published art book in over 10 years, as well as campaigns from Joseph Siraki and Kelly Williams, Danny Hellman, Old at War's Tommy Holes, and more. More campaigns are coming soon to Zoop from Joe Quesada, Camilla D'Erico, Alex Segura, Michael Marizzi, Dean Kotz, the Megaton Man Omnibus from Don Simpson and Fantagraphics, and others continually being announced. Zoop would like to thank all the creators who have recently submitted projects and urge more creators to submit your project to Zoop. Click the Submit Your Project link at zoop.gg, as they are providing services to even more creators than ever before. And now, back to the show. It is interesting. One of the things, I mean, I'm not trying to do a live review of the book or something like that, but I do think in some ways you integrate the narrative stuff into it better. And like, there's this one that's like about, I think it's like New York City in the Marvel universe, and like how like the different neighborhoods work. Yeah, New York State of Mind, this one. Like you work that in really nicely. And like I think that stuff is really smartly done. And but that's the interesting is like I don't know if it's better or if it's just kind of like a slightly different flavor of design that maybe you're leaning towards now or something. It's just different.
It's a little bit more refined. I tried to to get specific in the new book. I definitely tried to add more gradients and textures and shadow work, just to kind of give it a slightly different feel. The first book is super, super flat and kind of almost basic in a way.
It feels more infographic-y, like classic idea of infographic-y. Like it feels like this one is a little bit more of an evolved form, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I tried to make it a little bit refined. I mean, I tried.
You did a great job.
It's almost like the first book was done by a person who had never done infographics before.
I love the fact that you were hired. You're like, I'm going to do this book about infographics. Also, the next infographic I do will be the first one I've ever done in my entire book of infographics. That's amazing. Okay, I did want to talk about the subjects and how they came up. There is a shocking amount of the Krakoa era for the X-Men in this book. I say that as a person who's a very big proponent for the Krakoa era. That did make me wonder, how did you decide which subjects to tackle and which ones not to?
I first just sit down and just like, what would I want to see in there? And just like, I'm sure if you were to do this book, you could just rattle off a list of like basic ideas that you would have. And that's probably like half the book.
Do you like riff on like an Excel document, Word doc, your phone?
An Excel doc, yeah. I have like a long Excel sheet, and some of it just ideas, and then finding like sources, and then each one of those has its own Excel sheet of like doing the research and trying to like input data. That's where I started, and then just trying to like go back in and just like trying to find stuff that people are interested in. And then the other thing that's in this book are kind of like spotlights on classic stories,
like Born Again.
Yeah, Born Again, like the first run of Miss Marvel, which is not necessarily like a self-contained, but Days of Future Past, other, kind of just like stuff that I think people should read and try to like be a bit of a story guide. Yeah, that was one thing that I tried to bring to this book that was a little bit different from the other ones, just to kind of make it feel more timeless.
Yeah,
in a way, like the Star Wars one is great, but like as soon as the next movie came out, it was kind of out of date.
Right.
But we tried to like build this one so it could live for a lot longer. It can live for years and not feel out of date.
Well, and also like with Star Wars, they have all like I always mix it up. I think it's expanded universe, like the Legends books.
Oh, the Legends, yeah.
Yeah, the Legends books and stuff like that. I mean, like if let's say you did that. I mean, obviously you didn't, but like you say you did it before the Disney merger, where they moved over to Disney and everything like that, and all that stuff goes out. That would completely change the story. Marvel, the nice thing is it's been kind of one flow narrative since 1961.
That's right. So definitely try to kind of make it feel more timeless, and it could live on for years and years and years.
A key distinction, I think, between this one and like Star Wars Super Graphic versus the first Super Graphic is I think you worked with licensors on those two, didn't you?
Chronicle has publishing licenses with those companies.
Did that come with like any level of like oversight in terms of what you can or cannot do at all?
Yes. So, like, so for the first one, I worked with Lucasfilm on it. And on the Marvel book, we worked with Marvel.
How did that affect the process?
Overall, like really positive, especially because like they count it as like an in-universe book. And so like they want it to be true and accurate as possible and reflecting the spirit of the characters. And if we were going to make like a Deadpool joke, like, is that fitting of the character?
Right.
Yeah. And so like they wanted it to be the best product as well. And so I was happy to get any notes from that process because I don't want it to be, I just want it to be as good as possible.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Were there any that you specifically were like, I love this idea, but I can't figure out how to visualize it?
It was more that like, I would love to do this, but I can't quite find the data that I need on some of these because these stories are spanning decades, right? And there is like so much information, but sometimes it's like, oh, I just really need this like one really specific piece of information. And that's like, I have the one from over here and the one from over here, but not the one in the middle. Kind of need all three data points for it to be a thing. But like that was just never written because that was never a plan, decades ago, whatever. And so sometimes I just didn't have that data, which, it's like, okay, just move on to the next one.
Yeah. I mean, well, you said that Star Wars was 4 months. What was the time frame for this one?
About 9 months.
9 months? That's still a pretty hefty book and a lot of data visualization to do. And I'm sure you had to do plenty of research. I mean, I imagine you couldn't stick around on ideas that were running into real roadblocks for too long. Otherwise, you would just get stymied. Yes.
There were also no kind of gimme charts of like, let me do my bookshelf.
I mean, you could have done it. I still think that was a winner. I think it's really great. What was the research process like? I am curious as to how much of that was reading versus like just diving into old Marvel handbooks.
Love the handbooks. It was a lot of Marvel Unlimited.
Yeah.
Which was a great tool. I was like, oh shit. Like, let me just go through, and it was so much easier. Because like I don't think that was a thing back in when I did the first book. So it was a lot harder to find to do some of that research for the first super graphic. So this was so much better. So much better. There was just a lot of just like flipping through old issues. And
do you feel like putting these books together has changed your relationship with comics in any way?
Well, what a great question. I don't know. How does it change my relationship to them? I don't know. If at a certain point, like afterwards, I was like, I need to like not read comic books for a little bit.
Yeah, that's legit.
It's like, cause it's like so much in there. It's like you're just like drowning in comics for so much, and it's like I just need like a small break, and now I'm back in it, and it's I can enjoy them. Sometimes like the hard part, right, is like trying to make sure things don't feel like work, and when it's like part of your work. You just want to be able to enjoy it, right? Because like that's what drew me to comics in the first place, right? Is that it's like an escape and it's joy, and I love it, and you could just like really lose yourself in them. And sometimes when you're doing that as part of your job, you don't have access to that feeling of it. And so I was like really happy to kind of get back to that after such a long process.
It's funny. So you really value side projects and doing something for yourself. The funny thing is my dad, a piece of advice that he said to me when I was younger that has always stuck with me, he said, be careful about making your hobby your job because it can change your relationship with it. And I mean, it's real. I think it's like about achieving a balance, right? It's like every year I do my Sketched Awards. And so when I get to December, I basically spent the last 3 months reading comics every single waking moment that I have that is not doing my job or spending time with like my wife and my cats and stuff like that. And at the end of it, I'm like, I want to do literally anything besides read comics for like the next 2 months. And it's like, I don't know, if you have to binge doing anything, sometimes it can overwhelm you for a bit and you just need a bit of a reset.
Yeah, because you've done so many podcasts, so many episodes. I can't even imagine.
Like you talk to comic creators, it changes their relationship with it too. It can sometimes like it can become like a job and that makes it a little bit less fun, but I guess it is a job. So there you go. But when it comes to the actual data visualization part of it, what is your creative process? Like, how do you go from the Excel sheet to the page?
I've done enough of these that like I can usually see it just
from the Excel sheet.
Yeah, and it's like I have a pretty good idea of what it is, what it's going to be, and the best time is like when I'm wrong. It was like, oh, that didn't work. What's it going to be? I love that surprise, and because you're not always going to get it right on the first try. Not even close. But I would say I have a general idea on a bunch of them because I've done several hundred of them at this point. But yeah, I can generally see it.
Do you have an example of one that came together pretty quickly?
I mean, I think the one that you're holding,
Sentient Planets?
yes,
Yeah.
that one was like, yeah, I was like, I know exactly what that's going to look like. In fact, I think I had that one in my head, and I was like, let me just see how can I reverse engineer this chart, and like, can I find planet data that works for this?
I have to admit, finding out Ego was as small as he was actually kind of shocking to me as a reader. So thank you for that. Also, Id the Selfish Moon, did not know that one. That's a new one to me.
I mean, that's kind of was the nice, one of the great parts about the book is just kind of going through is like, oh, I didn't know this. I didn't know that was a thing. That's great. That's great. And that's kind of what I just love about comics too. It's just like, as many as you've read, and I'm sure you've read more than me, there's still stuff out there that you haven't read before.
Oh, yeah.
Great stuff, that you you've never even heard of yet.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of the fun about comics is like, you never know where your next favorite read is going to come from. It can be anything. And expanding what that is and finding your Id the Selfish Moon, that's where the magic happens in comics. And I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
You mentioned that you like kind of purposefully diversified the infographics across the 3 books. Do you think of diversity of the visualizations in a single book? Like, were you specific, like, I can't have too many of X, Y, or Z or something like that in Marvel Super Graphic?
Yeah, definitely. Because also, like, I don't want to get bored.
Yeah.
It's like, I want to be entertained. Yeah, I feel like if I'm having fun making it, it's a greater chance that someone's going to have fun reading it. And then that circles back to everything. Like, how I did like which chart, how I decided which chart to do, how to decide how to design them. It's like I just want to be interested. I just want to be. I don't want to be bored. I don't want this to be homework. This should be like fun and exciting. And if I'm having fun making them and writing them, then hopefully people have fun reading them.
Are you ever surprised by what people respond to with the different things, or maybe even don't respond to?
Yeah, like the Chris Ware sadness scale, for instance. Yeah.
Did you not expect me to be really into the Chris Ware sadness scale? I got building stories right up there, man.
Yeah, that's true.
It is funny because like there's like some things that I think are really funny. Like you have the ones that are basically like character faces that turn into I don't even know how to describe it, like charts where basically it's like Iron Man's one is like black represents kind of forgot what black repulsor rays, I think. And then there's one that's about iconic facial hair, and then the other one is about the future. And there's like 3 different colors and it forms Iron Man's face. And I think those are really funny. Like I like those as like a bit of a change of pace because it's kind of like, when you're reading a comic, not every page is going to be a giant splash that you have to spend 5 minutes reading over. Sometimes you got to change up the pace of the read.
Exactly.
And I found this one person who wrote about it, and they were like, kind of like low-key mad about those. And I was just like, it's very surprising that you can be so passionate about Rocket Raccoon's face.
I definitely know what you're talking about, but not everything's going to be for everyone, and that's okay.
Yeah. You probably didn't expect me to be like, New York State of Mind. Hell yeah. Let's go. I don't know. I just think it's interesting because, I mean, I guess like with any comic book or any story really, like, or anything anybody makes, people are going to respond differently to everything.
That's true. And you can't control it. I've done what I can do. I've tried to make the best, and however people receive it, that's up to them. You buy it, you can think whatever you want, whatever you want.
I have to ask, are there any other subjects you would personally love to give the super graphic treatment to, or are you just waiting for a Chronicle to come to you based off of the rate that it's going at in 10 years? 4, 7, and then 10.
I am still coming off the intensity of building this one to think about doing another one.
You don't want to do a Stiltman book to make up for the fact that you forgot him?
Just
Stiltman.
I feel like you could do a Stiltman, but it would be like a fold out.
Ooh.
It would be like a fold out pamphlet or like a scroll that would be like 15 feet tall, but you just kind of like, I think there's something here, David.
You got to talk to Chronicle about doing a special addendum at next year's San Diego Comic-Con where it's like, if you buy this book, you also get the fold out centerfold of Stiltman to insert in your own book.
Yes. And it just keeps folding.
Just like into infinity. It's actually life size, 500 feet tall. It's fantastic. Oh, God. Yeah, I mean that is the funny thing is I imagine this happens where I was like thinking I was like should I even ask if there's like is there another book you would like to do, but it's just you just finished a 9-month sprint basically. Probably actually, when did you finish this? I imagine you've been done for a while now.
I think I turned it in October last year.
Okay, but I mean like a 9-month sprint still, I mean that's a lot of work, and like you probably need some decompression where you're just not doing infographics for a while before you go back to something like that.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot of fun. You have to like let your brain breathe again.
Yeah. Well, and also you have to get back to a point where it's fun too, because like you said, if you're not having fun with it, then reader's not going to have fun with it.
That's true. Yeah, you want to bring everything you can to it. Yeah.
So to close, I actually wanted to talk about some bigger picture comic stuff. I know it's not entirely your world anymore. You're not just making books, but you're working in design and you have a day job where you're not having to make infographics of Iron Man's face, for example. As someone who is so immersed in the comic world for so long, I'm curious, like, what interests you the most about the world of comics these days? Like, is there something you find to be particularly exciting or confusing or inspiring from the world of comics?
I think it's a really interesting time in comics, right? Like there's even like just this year is like pretty wild, right? Like there's all these lines starting, there's like new companies starting, there's like different imprints starting, companies getting sold. I think it's really interesting to see what's going to happen with all these companies and so much change and like what that's going to turn out to be. I'm really excited about that. And I know I saw, I went to New York. I saw you briefly at New York Comic, or San Diego, and I hadn't been in a couple years, like since the pandemic, and it was just great just to walk around and just like find cool stuff on the floor and stuff that I hadn't even heard of. I don't know. I was just like really vibing. It was like I was enthusiastic because like I hadn't seen a lot of this stuff before, and like this one.
Oh yeah, Pee Pee Poo Poo.
Pee Pee Poo Poo. This was great.
Caroline Cash.
Amazing. I loved it. I had never heard of it, and I just happened upon the Silver Sprocket booth.
Yeah.
So cool. So cool.
I do want to note the Eisner Award winning Pee Pee Poo Poo.
Yes. Not an Eisner loser. That's an Eisner winner.
That's correct. That's what we chose the wrong name. We've made a huge mistake. I have to say, wait, you didn't go to the Eisners, right?
I did not.
Okay. Not the worst choice. I will say there was 2 kids, like teenagers from from Stranger Things. I have literally no idea who they played in that show. I've seen every season of that show, and I was like, I don't know who you are. But they were presenting the award that Caroline Cash won for that comic, and they were so delighted to say the words pee pee poo poo on stage multiple times. I think the true award winner was the Stranger Things kids who got to say that twice, much to their delight.
It'll be even more delight when they read the comic because it's great.
Absolutely. I mean, that is kind of like what we were talking about earlier is the amazing thing about comics is you never know where your next favorite comic is going to come from. Like it's October, it's Shortbox Comics Fair month. That is a huge deal for me. I think I bought 33 comics from that this year.
Really?
Yeah. And the funny thing about it though, is like I bought 33 comics from it and somebody else may think it's like the best year ever for comics and they don't even read a single one. And both answers are totally legitimate because there's so many comics to read.
Yeah. And again, the trick is just finding the time to do that.
Yes. And making sure that your bookshelf infographic actually represents things you're reading also. You talked about a break earlier, though. You talked about how you took that break in college. And a lot of people, like, especially during the pandemic, a lot of people rediscovered comics and then kind of moved on once again. Like, that was a common tale. What do you think it is that keeps you coming back to comics?
I just feel like I have a connection to it, to the books, to the industry. I feel like comics were there for me when I was a kid, like when I was younger, and it like helped me find community and like understand myself better. And so I definitely have like a affinity for comics because of that. And I think I'll always have that and always come back to comics. Yeah.
I mean, we talked about it earlier with your magazine work. It was like a home base for that too. You were finding ways to insert that in there. And I'm sure it won't be the last time you insert comics into a different part of your life. You seems like you have a lot of crossovers in your life.
Yes. Yes, that's true. Yes.
I love it. Well, Tim, I love the work that you do. Super Graphic is fantastic. Everyone should check out Marvel's Super Graphic, but that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about Super Graphic, Marvel Comics design, and everything else. I really appreciate you taking the time.
David, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, man.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with designer Tim Leong. You can find him on Twitter and Instagram at Tim Leong and his work in the recently released book, Marvel Super Graphic. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman for stepping in to edit this episode. If it sounds better than usual, it's because of her. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating and review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketch at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following it on Twitter and Instagram at @sketchcomic or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including David Byrne, Milton Lawson, David Wilson, Joe, Benjamin Wilkins, Chris Hacker, John Neesmith, John Auerbach, Dustin Weaver, Ninja Assassin Love Story Webcomic, Brandon Heyman, Aiden Hammond, Kenny Myers, Faith Aaron Hicks, Ah Yeah Comics, Ben Rowe, Cameron Brown, Jonathan Breen, Danny Ollie, Charlie Stickney, Tom Drennan, Jeremy Thomas Burke, Jared Schwab, Scott Dunn, Chip Mosher, Seth Pomeroy, James McEwen, Andrew Lehman, Christina Merkler, Scott Place, Travis Gibb, Darcy Van Polges, Tom Evans, Reed Beeman, Kelly Zudakonic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian Hull, Near Levy, Jason Hussad, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Django Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Domstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Keeps and Tights Podcast, Klaus Vandeven, Submen Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon DePills, Patrick Power, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Leona Kangas, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Stephen Holt, Philip Myra, Chris Pacella, Torrin Grunbeck, Buzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwand, Vita Ayala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendrick, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Carl McMahon, Adam Heifel, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's outro and ad music just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.